Just wanted to say welcome again. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Caitlin Augustine. I'm the Vice President of Product and Programs here at DataKind. So I lead our team that works directly with social impact organizations to identify ways that data and technology can be a part of a social impact solution so that we can do more great work in our communities. Just before we jump in, wanted to give a few reminders. Thank you everyone who's joined for accepting DataKind's Code of Conduct. Reminder, we do have a Code of Conduct. We are recording this session. This session will be recorded and it will be posted on social media later. It'll be on YouTube and LinkedIn. Again, please share your questions using the Q&A box. DataKind staff are also in the chat, so feel free to engage with them in the chat. And if you're posting on social, please hashtag DataKind. We love to see your engagement out in the world. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about DataKind. You found your way here, so you know something about us, but we're going to share a little bit about who DataKind is and how we think this power of collective impact really can make a change in the world. We're going to actually launch the DataKit. We're going to have Frank Wells from Bright Community Trust, who's a DataKind and DataKit partner, talk to us a little bit about the housing challenges that he's hoping to tackle with data and technology. And we're going to give you the instructions for how to get started, which I know is why everyone's here, because you're ready to dig in on the data. And then throughout, we'll be answering your questions as they come in. So DataKind. We launched in 2012. So folks who are in this call, you might have been at our very first events back in 2012, 12 years ago. We are an organization that believes in harnessing the power of data science and AI in the service of humanity. And we do this through community-driven events like Data Dives and now the DataKit. We do this through long-term projects such as our data core projects and our longer-term product launches. And we also have a global network of technologists and chapter hubs around the world. And for us, we think of success as when DataKind and our partners have created solutions that are adopted widely and they contribute positively to social sector problems. And we're so thrilled that you're going to be a part of that journey with us. Now, I gave you a little bit of where we are, what we've done. In 12 years, we've done a lot. We have over 30,000 community members. And I'm so thrilled to say, I'm talking to over 100 of you live right now, which is just astonishing. Thank you for raising your hand and for joining us in this conversation today. For folks who are watching it on recording, we had over 500 people say, yes, I'm interested and I'm ready to engage with the DataKit. So we are so thrilled to have you. You are now part of this 30,000 person community around the world, representing individuals from over 170 countries and 5 chapter hubs throughout the US and internationally. And through that work, DataKind has been able to complete over 350 projects with over 200 partner organizations. And that has led us to donating over $35 million in pro bono services. So, you know, a huge pat on the back for everyone who's volunteered today. You are committing to a path to really making a difference in your communities and beyond. So that is a lot of information and a lot of impact that we've had over 12 years. And all of that has come to this idea of one new way of engaging with the world, the DataKit. So why is DataKind doing a DataKit? Well, we've realized that the data and analysis frameworks that we've used in our one-off events, like our Data Dives, and our single-time engagements, like our Data Core, are so useful and valuable that we want to expand that to provide the framework to communities around the world to create insights and drive action in their backyards. We know there's a lot of local talent and enthusiasm in every community to work and tackle these big challenges. And we also know it's hard to get started. What's the problem we want to work on? What information should we work with? The goal of the DataKit is to make it easy to start making an impact in your community on your own pace and on your own schedule, thanks to the expert-defined problems that we've put together and the expert vetted data sets to start with. And for those of you who have engaged in challenges and other things in the world, I will say we were deeply inspired by activities like Aggle's community challenges and the GovLab's 100 questions and DigitalOcean's Hacktoberfest, which we're so lucky to be launching in alignment with. So you'll learn a little bit more about that later. But that's why we're launching. And what exactly is it? Well, it is this free and open self-contained kit that has these community-solicited social impact questions. I'm going to shout out Chris Chenet and Shayna Lee and Jacob Harris from the DataKind team, who are all in the chat here to say they worked with community members over the past months to solicit questions in the housing space that really need big answers, and they have big ideas behind them. We pulled together these expert vetted data sets. So big thanks to not only our staff members, but also our network of volunteers who have identified data sets from the local to the national level that we can start to dive in and work on. And we've put together self-paced activities, flexible timelines, and this ability to engage around the clock. For anyone who's worked on a DataKind challenge in the past, when we've been part of the community of assessing and scoring challenges, that engagement for 24 hours a day mentality is something we're taking on here. There's global connectivity, and as results come through over the next 6 weeks, we will be putting together these gallery of insights and results. And because we have community partners connected throughout this, we are looking for ways that the ideas will be immediately taken forward and extended by collaborating organizations. Our first data kit focus is housing. So this is DataKind's housing data kit launch. And the reason we picked housing was because it is an area that has robust and available high quality data at national, state, and local levels with clearly defined quantitative problems. We are looking at problems of understanding inventory, understanding costs, understanding geographic distributions of people and place. It is an area where there's a lot of data-minded individuals who are looking to build out a solution. So we have many great partners who are active and engaged, who are ready to take this information forward and drive action. And it's also a place that DataKind has had some of our earliest work was in housing. And I'm going to share, just as a way of anchoring what could come out of the data kit, a couple of examples from a civic engagement rapid response event that DataKind did that really shows this power of collective impact, where volunteers came together to understand a problem and to build out that early phase of solutions to lead to impact. This was in partnership with the city of Los Angeles, and the big challenge was to figure out ways to protect tenants from excessive rent increases and prevent arbitrary evictions. So to help keep more people in their homes. Big, big task. Now, volunteers came together and they did research. This was a low code, no code engagement here, where finding the information on how, where, and why potential exits from housing programs were happening, and using that information to actually start to build out an indication of what might be having a program exit a rent stability, what might have a property exit rent stability programming, which would lead to a change in the rental makeup of a particular community. That research was hugely influential and helped us move on to subsequent problems and engagements around the world. Now, the volunteer teams pulled together data analysis and visualizations that actually took those public data sets and visualized where potential program policy violations were occurring. So at that local level, providing insight to housing actors who might be able to take that information and enact change on a community level to support keeping more individuals in their homes. And then finally, the team also prototyped an application, an interactive dashboard that showed that housing change over time. So these paths of research, data analysis, visualization, and prototyping, these are all activities that we are hoping to have done over the course of the data kit. Now, I hope that whet your appetite for some of the types of solutions you might be able to come up with, but to really help us land this home and to show the scale of the type of solution that you could be impacting, I'm going to hand it over to Frank Wells in a second. Frank Wells, who's the President and Chief Impact Officer of Bright Community Trust, is a lifelong entrepreneur who has done a huge amount of work across Florida and beyond But now he leads Bright Community Trust, where he solves the critical need for good, safe, and healthy homes within financial reach for every individual and family across Florida. Frank is also part of DataKind's Social Impact Partners Advisory Group. And over the past, I would say, close to 5 years that Frank's been engaged with the DataKind community, I will say he has pushed us to think deeply and creatively about how data can be brought to solving the pressing problems of the housing crisis. So I'm going to hand it over to Frank now to help us dig in on the problems that we are actually going to try to solve. So over to you, Frank.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. It's really wonderful to be here with everybody this morning. Really appreciate the invite. And I can't tell you how important this work is. Applying data so that we're actually solving these critical challenges is so valuable to the work that Bright Community Trust does. So let me launch in and kind of frame this discussion just a little bit by saying, here I sit in Florida, right? A city asked me a while ago, can you come talk to our city commission and give us a high level picture of why housing is so challenging in Florida? And here's what I came up with. Let's start with, we've got 800 something people per day moving into the state of Florida. The people that move in have higher incomes than the people that move out. And 4 times as many people move in as move out, right? So we net 800 people a day, something like 300,000 people a year. You got to figure out where to put them. And those higher incomes and higher asset bases that they bring with them means that they outcompete the locals for homes to buy or homes to rent. That's a big challenge. We're also already about 1 million units behind on affordably priced, whatever that means to your own budget, affordably priced homes to rent. Oh, plus hurricanes, right? So it's a challenging place to work. But if we can figure out things that work here to effectively address housing needs, then boy, can we share solutions that can be used all around. I'll give you a quick overview of Bright Community Trust. We started back in 2008 with a vision to solve housing challenges for people. We think that everybody deserves a good place to live in a neighborhood that they like, that it's close to a good job, it's close to a good school, it's close to the kind of community amenities that we all enjoy, whether that's a park, a grocery store, a doctor's office, all those kinds of things. And most importantly, that it fits comfortably in the budget. That means very different things at different life stages, different ages, different household sizes, and different income levels. We need every step on that housing ladder all the way up. We do a whole lot of different things to get there. I don't want to dwell too deeply on all that. Happy to talk with anybody later about that. But I did think I would start with sharing a little bit with you about what is housing. If we're going to talk about how to apply data to solve housing problems, we probably better be talking about what the heck is housing. I'll just point out that we're building a lot of things in most cities in America on one end or the other of the spectrum, either detached single-family homes, if you look down there at the left side of the screen, or mid-rise apartment buildings. We do a fairly good job of building both of those things. Everything in the middle, we're typically doing a pretty lousy job of building in almost every city in America. We've taken to referring to that as the missing middle. These are things that 100 years ago, we built a lot of. And if you look at the favorite neighborhoods in most cities, what you'll find is a lot of this mix of housing types. And we've become kind of a housing monoculture in most places. Also think it's important to define, what do we mean when we say affordable housing? And we have a standard definition here. So for those of you who don't spend your days in housing world like I do, here's our working definition. If you're spending more than 30% of your paycheck on your housing's not affordable. We're going to use that as a kind of key metric here. And why do we care about that? Because if you spend more than 30% of your paycheck on housing, there's not enough left over for everything else. You're not saving in the event of an emergency. You may not have a reliable vehicle, so you're one breakdown away from losing a job if you have to commute. You probably aren't eating good, nutritious food and feeding your family well. You may not be getting optimal health care. All these things track back to too much goes out the door the first of the month to pay that rent or mortgage, pay the utility bills, not enough left over for everything else. And that becomes a problem that ripples through every other sector. It also affects businesses, recruiting, it affects our regional economies as much as it affects households. Another term we sometimes come across, and this can be a helpful way to think about things, our friends at United Way came up with the acronym ALICE to describe the population of folks who are asset limited, meaning they don't have a whole lot of savings, income constrained. They typically have a paycheck job or two or three, but it's just barely getting them by, and they're employed. ALICE is the heart of our workforce. Like half the population of our state fits in this broad category. And a lot of folks that we could describe as our ALICE population are really struggling. And a lot of that comes down to, again, too much spent on housing costs. Thought we would give a few numbers here just so you can see these are HUD's idea of what fair market rent is. HUD goes out and looks at all the rents in an area and basically picks the 40th percentile and says, that's a pretty good indicator of what the fair market value of rents are. And so if you want to know what a 2-bedroom ought to cost in Orange County in 2024, HUD says 1857 is about what the market will bear in a county where the median income is about $90,000. We also look at what is affordable to people at different income levels, AMI, area median income, what percentage of the area median income, if you look at that AMI category, and what are the incomes for people in these various income categories. So we're starting to look at some data around housing, right? Someone who is living at 80% of the area median income in a 3-person household is earning $69,520. If you look at that matrix, that means if you also follow the bottom chart, 80%, and they're going to live in a 2-bedroom, that means they can afford no more than $1,738. You saw on the last slide that the fair market rent is higher than that, right? So we already know that there's a disparity between what people can reasonably afford and what the market's actually setting prices at. Thought it might be helpful to take a look at what our big workforce job sectors are and how many of our workforce are in them. So what you're seeing here, this is for the Orlando metro area, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, MSA. If we just look across that top category, we're listing all the occupations. The median hourly wage in 2023, $19.84. That equates to roughly $40,000 a year of income. That means if you spent 30% of that on a paycheck, that's $1,032 a month that you've got available for rent. HUD's 2023 fair market rent number for a 2-bedroom was $1,616. So you can see a giant disparity. If you've got one income in the household and you're trying to make a go of it, a huge difference. So you'd actually not spend 30%, but you'd spend 47% of your paycheck to pay for that fair market rent apartment. Now we have 1.3 million workers here, and the annual wage is 52% AMI for a family, right? Look at the other big job categories here. I ranked these by number of workers in 2022. So you can see retail sales, waiters and waitresses, customer service reps, cashiers, fast food workers, office clerks. All these categories, if you look at how much of their paycheck would they have to spend to afford a 2-bedroom place, 62% for retail sales, 63% for waiters and waitresses, 50% for customer service reps. Way too much of the paycheck would have to go to the housing. The one category in our top 10 that actually earns enough to spend less than 30% of the paycheck on average is registered nurses. Everybody else in the top 10 categories would have to spend too much of their paycheck to afford their housing. And so we start to break down these numbers and look at housing cost burden. Who spends less than 30%? That's my green color code. This is literally numbers that I pulled last night from one of our favorite data partners, the Schimberg Center for Housing Studies, that hosts the Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse. Who spends from 30 to 50%? That's the yellow caution category. And who spends more than 50% on housing costs? This is broken down by various income levels. and give you some numbers. I add up the 30 and 50% categories to get a greater than 30% category to show what those overall numbers look like. It's broken down by renters and by homeowners, so you can see them separately and then totaled up at the top there. So 183,000 households in Orange County spending more than 30% of their paycheck. They're in the housing danger zone. I'll just point out that this is the kind of thing that I would love to not pull down the data manually, dump it in a spreadsheet, do this analysis myself manually, one county at a time. So if anybody's looking for a data project, I would love to have a widget like this that lives on my website that could pull this data down and people could compute this live for any county in Florida or for the whole state, et cetera. But this is the kind of thing where we're talking about connecting data with how it actually gets used. Here's another visualization of the same for 2016, way back when we tried to visualize it a different way. But again, would love to have a visualization like this that lives on my website. I'm going to skim through this, but we'll send it out to you later. Why is it so important to know the data? Because the data drives the policy, drives the funding. It gives us the information to have an intelligent conversation about sustainability and resiliency. It's the basis for good communication strategy and talking about how we build capacity to address this. Some other data sources that we use in some of our work looking at what do communities need. This is on the map from census that lets us look at commuting patterns. One place that we have used a lot of data and the place where we first started working with DataKind was on the issue of evictions. So this is literally eviction data from the Orange County court system. We have a friendly judge there who from the very beginning of the pandemic sends us monthly data on how many evictions are filed. But I'll point out what we know is an initial filing of an eviction. What we don't know, I don't have data that's this good for what's the disposition for each of those cases. Does it get resolved? Does somebody pay up and get back in their apartment? Do they hand in the keys and say, don't take this case forward? Does it go all the way through and a judge issues an order and somebody actually gets evicted? Don't know. So we have some good data, but there are a lot of places where we have gaps in our understanding of what happens. One of the first places, like I said, where we crossed over with our friends at DataKind was a report that they did with our partners at New America called Displaced in America, and then a follow-up report called Displaced in the Sunbelt. And Orange County was one of the study areas, so we were really excited to get to help pilot that work and to be able to look at where do evictions happen and what else do we know about the neighborhoods where evictions happen. Just leave this data on the screen for just a second, but this is the kind of thing that when we connect the data, we can have a more intelligent conversation about the housing challenges. Heat is an amazing tool that's now publicly accessible. You can drop your local eviction data into it anywhere in the country. It'll pull in the Census American Community Survey data, and it can tell you a lot about what are the characteristics of the neighborhoods where evictions happen, where housing loss happens. Here's output from the FEAT tool looking at Jacksonville up in Northeast Florida and some of the correlations with various factors: education, income level, percent of population in the neighborhood that are African-American, et cetera, et cetera. And Caitlin showed the same tweet, but this is why this is so important, because this information is actionable when we can run the tool and show what neighborhoods, when the county says 36 hours until we shut down emergency rental assistance, we can run this tool and show here's where you need to send teams of volunteers to make the most impact. Here's where we can use the data to actually affect people's lives. We then subsequently worked with DataKind to overlay emergency rental assistance data on top of this FEAT tool to analyze what do we know about neighborhoods with high eviction rates and which neighborhoods have high eviction rates but low utilization of emergency rental assistance. Because those would be neighborhoods where we need to do more outreach, because here are places where there's a big problem, but we're not doing an effective job of getting the resources out. Again, a great use of data to affect what we can actually do in the real world. Here's those two actually on a chart. Some other things that we do with data, maybe I'm just trying to plant a lot of seeds for you to think about what kinds of things can be done with data in the housing world. We did a housing affordability study at Bright for the city of Naples down in Southwest Florida a couple of years ago. We worked with our partners at Schimberg Center for Housing Studies to pull this data together. And if you look down to renter occupied units by household size, the bottom chart, look at Naples City, look at that first piece of the chart, 56% of renters in the city of Naples are one-person households. That tells us, hey, we're actually relatively overbuilt for 3 and 4 bedroom places. We need more studio and 1 bedroom places because we have this disproportionately large number of small households. 1 or 2 person households constitute over 80% of the households in Naples. So again, here's a point where actually diving into the data deeply gives us actionable information to affect policy. We then also inventoried housing assets. What kind of apartments and homes for rent, studio 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom places are available at what cost on a map. So we stretched them out geographically so we can understand where are the matches and the mismatches between households and housing. But this data we had to pay for. That was worth paying for to do this study. But is there a data opportunity here for what could be harvested without paying for the data to show this kind of match and mismatch between households and housing? Maybe so. Like I said, we'll send you the slides later. Another thing that we're using data for, and really important, is the gap between home ownership for white families, about 75% own a home, and for Black and Hispanic families, about 50% own homes. That gap in home ownership translates into huge differences in household wealth, translates into, we know, for instance, that families that own a home have better educational outcomes. Might suspect that that has to do with more housing stability. Kids who live in a homeowner household move schools less often, may have more opportunity. So we care deeply about the data. Another opportunity for data, Hurricane Ian hit in Southwest Florida a couple of years ago. I sit on a state housing disaster task force. We get a weekly report in the aftermath of a hurricane or other disaster like that. And we would hear the count of how many homes were destroyed, how many took major damage, moderate damage, minor damage. What I realized after a while is that doesn't actually tell us a whole lot about what housing goes away and what housing comes back to replace it. If a $5 million beachfront vacation home goes away, pretty good chance a $5 million beachfront vacation home is coming back. If a $200,000 home that's owned by a teacher who bought it 10 years ago, chances are pretty good that they're underinsured and they may sell that to an investor who is going to knock it down and build a $600,000 home to replace it, that now becomes accessible for somebody who's moving into Florida because they want to retire here, but it's no longer affordable to somebody locally in the housing economy at that more affordable price point. So we circled back with our friends at DataKind and said, can you help us build a tool here that'll help us look at how does disaster affect the data economy? And so we created this tool. We've built an early prototype for this that analyzes what's the risk of losing affordably priced housing based on FEMA data and property appraiser data and census data, overlaying this so we can look at this. And this gives us some pretty cool insights into what happens to housing in the aftermath of a disaster. Share a couple more favorite data sources that we tap all the time. I've mentioned Schimber Center for Housing Studies and their Florida Census Bureau's data.census.gov. That is a wealth of data, and they're on the map tool, which is pretty cool. And then also Central Florida's Homeless Management Information System. They have a great dashboard about what's happening to folks experiencing homelessness in our Central Florida region. If you're elsewhere and want to work on a housing problem elsewhere, you can find an equivalent HMIS in whatever community in America you're part of. Again, why do we care so much about housing? It's because when too much goes out the door for housing the first of the month, there's not enough left over for everything else. Families pay the price for that. All of us in the community pay the price for that. Thank you so much for caring about these issues, for being with us today. It's really exciting to be part of this great conversation, and especially thanks to our friends at DataKind for hosting this conversation. Can't wait to take your questions. Look forward to talking with everybody.
Thank you so much, Frank. You might not have seen the chat going, but there were a couple of points of these are amazing and impactful info, striking info, some questions of how did you get the data? Really, I think quite a lot of excitement and engagement here, and you've teased a couple of the upcoming challenges that we'll tackle with the data kit. I just looking at a couple of questions, I'm going to jump in and say, what surprised you? You know, so in these opportunities to engage with volunteers and get your big questions answered, what are some things that have surprised you with getting the data?
I will tell you the first big surprise for me was when we put the Evictions and Foreclosures Task Force together just over 4 years ago at this point, and we asked for evictions data. The judge was able to give us that chart that was in one of my slides for evictions data through, I think at that point, through August of 2020. And when I said, what am I looking at? He said, well, this is all the eviction filings that happen. That's the initial legal paperwork that says somebody is usually behind in rent or otherwise being a bad tenant, right? They're busting the place up or something. I want to evict them, says their landlord. Cool. So what happens with that? Oh, well, how many of those cases do people actually get evicted? I don't really know. I was like, what do you mean? Can't we just pull a report with that data? No, not really. Oh, who would have that data? Well, the sheriff's office would have that data. Oh, so we got it on the sheriff's office website. Oh, no, it's not on the website. Oh, so there's a chief data officer for the sheriff's department, right? No, probably not. Oh, that was the biggest aha for me was um, the data exists, the data is not organized, right? Somewhere there is a spreadsheet of the disposition of every writ of possession that is sent from the court system to the sheriff's office. And a sheriff's deputy went out and tacked a note on their door, and in some cases had to physically remove people from the property. That data is nowhere to be found, right? In a way that's accessible to even those of us who are intimately involved in this work, much less to the general public. And, let me point out, much less to elected officials who are charged with making policy decisions about how do we handle evictions. So if I don't know about this and I'm up to my eyeballs in this, how in the world is somebody on a city council, a county commission, in the state legislature who deals with housing issues, but deals with water quality issues and sports funding and the arts, right? How are they supposed to act on these things when the data is not readily accessible?
Well, I'm hearing data accessibility is a big challenge, and that's definitely something that we're going to be working on during the data kit. last question for you, Frank, is almost your elevator pitch here. What's a tool you desperately need that you want this team to start working on?
I mentioned it on my way through my presentation because it hit me as I was sitting there last night, pulling numbers off of the Schimberg site, clicking download as Excel. I get, unformatted Excel data, and then I slice and dice it into a way that makes sense for me. That's really helpful. And also, I'm doing a presentation in Gainesville later this week for a working group up there. I'm going to have to do exactly the same exercise all over again manually because I'm a housing guy and not a technology person. So manual gets the job done. It's also really slow and cumbersome. And I would love to be able to go on Bright's website or point somebody to Bright's website and say, what county do we want to look at? Hillsborough or Tampa is cool. Let's drop down and pick Hillsborough. What do we want? Current year data is 2022 data. Cool. Here you go. Oh, would you like to compare that historically to 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018? Oh, a visualization of how things have changed over time. Those are the kinds of things that we would love to see. If I can give you another example, let's set that one aside for a moment, but the connection between the data that we have on eviction filings, we've occasionally been able to get data about the disposition. So we have at least a little data to tell us that about 50% of those cases wind up in actual evictions. And a lot of other, cases can get resolved in a lot of other ways. But if 1,500 filings happen, that probably means that around 750 of those wind up with actual evictions. And we know some things about families experiencing homelessness in Central Florida. We do an annual physical point in time count on one day every year to go out and literally meet everyone and try to count folks who are unhoused. That's our best snapshot of the data. And then every agency that touches the homelessness system in some ways puts data in their own ways. So we want to understand where do people come to access resources. We want to try to the extent possible, prevent duplication and so forth. But I don't know much of anything about what happens between the evictions and someone who is homeless, right? There's a journey there that happens, right? Do I get evicted from my apartment and then I go stay with friends for a while? Or I have family that has a spare bedroom that my kids and I can crash in. For some people, is there a kind of good outcome to the story that I got evicted, but I found another place? I don't know.
Well,
Right?
Frank, sorry, I just I was just saying someone has just jumped into the host side chat to just empathize with you about all the challenges to manipulating data, and I think you've really put a call to action that has put a lot of identified a lot of folks' pain points here. So
For sure. And yeah. I'll just share an example of that from last night. The income brackets have changed since the last time I did the exact same analysis. And so I had to go back and, take my template spreadsheet from 3 years ago and update all the income brackets and change some of the math. And if I didn't visually notice that, I'd be actually presenting bad analysis to somebody. And for sure, comparing this to where we're 4 years ago is apples and oranges because the income brackets that we're presenting have changed.
It's a big challenge, and I think that's a great segue for me to tell all the folks on the call, and we've hit around 150 or so here, and I know more will be watching on the recording, how they can get started working on these big challenges. So Frank, thank you so much for your time and for explaining to us really the value of data here and giving us some great insights for the pathways we can really drive impact for you and your team. So I'm going to now share my screen to give folks their marching orders, where to go next. And everyone on the call, please give your thanks to Frank in the chat, and also know he will be on this journey with us. So as an expert resource who will be available to assess our questions, give us feedback throughout this journey. All right, so how do we get started? This has been a question in the chat of saying, okay, I'm ready, I'm bought in, what do I do next? Well, over the next 6 weeks, you will be doing self-organized collaboration. So as volunteers, you'll analyze, visualize, and engage with data to create insights and prototypes for solution building. This will happen over Slack. DataKind will be inviting you all into our Slack community to engage. You will also be invited to GitHub, where we are encouraging you to submit any and all work. DataKind, we're fond of saying that the wrong answers are just as important as the right answers, because as organizations and individuals who are working to support nonprofits and social impact groups who might not have the time to do the investigation and the journey, every time we as a DataKind team can get something wrong and learn from it and document how we got to that wrong answer, it helps our community of social impact partners not make that same mistake, not go down that path with us as well. So please commit all of your work, right answers, wrong answers, in progress answers. There will be opportunities to co-work in person. So if you are in one of our hub areas, or if you're in Orlando, the Orlando devs are taking on some in-person meetups. So look for posts across Slack for opportunities to engage in person, and to also join some virtual periodic office hours that DataKind will be hosting. I mentioned that Frank isn't going away, but Frank and other community collaborators, as well as the DataKind staff, will be on hand to engage throughout the DataKit across Slack. So Slack will be our primary medium here. We are looking for you to learn through this. So we've had some questions about, can I do this if I'm still a student? Absolutely. This is a great opportunity for you to learn, to gain new skills, and to test those skills and to contribute with those skills. We are looking for research, helping us find and evaluate solutions from across all 50 states. We've seen some great proof points in Los Angeles. We've seen some great ones in Orlando. We've seen some great ones out of Chicago. And I know we have a number of volunteers who are joining us from Chicago. Help us catalog what is happening around the United States and around the world, and apply those learnings to our data sets and to our activities here. We are looking for you to do data analysis and visualizations. This is a great chance to use your machine learning skills, your AI skills, but also your basic statistics, data cleaning, and visualization skills. Our goal is to make information interpretable and accessible for our end users who are members of the communities. And we are looking for prototyping. So yes, prototypes are experimental applications. We love to see an app built, but we also love to see the mock-ups, the user flows, the creation of documents and written information that could lead to that end state solution that we're looking for. So those are all the ways that you can contribute. We have 4 big challenges that we are looking for you to tackle. The first is around understanding housing inventory. As Frank mentioned, as many others have mentioned, this question of how many homes are available to individuals at different income levels is an incredibly hard problem to tackle, because you are moving through dozens, if not hundreds, of data sets and Excel sheets trying to pull that information together. So we are looking to answer that question in a repeatable way, so we have a methodology that can be used by any actor in the United States. We're also looking to answer a big question around anticipating displacement in communities. So as rents rise, as buildings are constructed, the cost of living in communities changes, the available housing in communities changes. We are looking to anticipate what that could look like, so as to inform policies that could mitigate the displacement of households. So minimize the potential for individuals to be involuntarily removed from their communities. We're also looking for a big body of work around planning for new housing development. There's an abundance of federal funding right now that can support the construction of new housing. This is at a national level, but also at state and local levels. We want to know, where can those dollars be distributed, and what else is needed in those communities? And then finally, we are looking to build that next step of understanding around post-disaster housing response. So Frank gave us some examples around housing after a hurricane. We also know housing after wildfires, housing after tornadoes. The growing impact of natural disasters having a huge impact on housing across the United States, and building an understanding of vulnerability to disasters and how to proactively respond and to rebuild post-disaster will be key. And for every one of our challenges, we have eager community collaborators who are ready to answer your questions and to take that information forward as it's put together. And finally, we do want you to celebrate. We will be sharing ideas and learnings weekly, so we want you to engage with that great work in the Slack. As you go along this journey and you participate, you'll get a certificate of participation from DataKind. You'll be invited into DataKind's global community of technologists to engage, so this doesn't just stop after this 6 weeks. And if you are eager to participate in Hacktoberfest, this repo and this body of work is part of Hacktoberfest, so any contribution you make into this repo would also count toward your Hacktoberfest points and goals. And again, we'll be sharing all of this out on Slack and through our shares over the next 6 weeks. So, ready to take some action. If you have your phone with you, you can scan this QR code, but also Shane is going to post every link in the chat. So first thing, join our Slack workspace. Get in there, get engaged, start connecting and asking questions. The Slack workspace will be your point of communication for the data kit over the next 6 weeks. We are doing this work through November 4th. So we are going through Hacktoberfest, which is the month of October. And then start poking around the DataKind repo. You'll find details on all the challenges and all the data sets in the repository here. We will be doing regular prize drawings based on contribution over the next 6 weeks. And again, we will have certificates of participation if you contribute consistently over the process. And then, of course, we do have digital swag, and we encourage you to rock that over your engagement period and to show your DataKind love. I'm going to jump into answering some questions that are popping into the chat. So, will we know what others are working on? We encourage you to share what you're working on in the Slack community and as well as the GitHub. So every GitHub challenge, every challenge is in GitHub as a discussion. So you can put in how you're doing your work, what you're doing, or what things you're getting stuck on. We encourage conversation around what you're working on and forming those collaborations to work on things together. Also, I do want to say, don't worry about duplicating efforts. We love to see the many different approaches people do to get to the same answer or the same problem. There's a lot of different approaches. There's not one right way to work on these. So if there's a problem you really want to work on, please work on that, even if you think someone else is doing it, because it's a great way for us to learn all the different ways we can get to a solution. Couple of different questions here just around logistics. You do not need work authorization to be a DataKind volunteer. We are, US centric in this specific housing challenge, but we'd encourage you, if you are international and you're looking to work on a problem internationally in your community, we'd be glad for that to be brought into this housing data kit. We'd love to learn from your experiences in your local community. And again, what data, what insights, what information coming up. So yes, please participate regardless of where you are in the world. What happens on November 4th? So on November 4th, we will wind down. We're gonna put a line in the sand and say, on November 4th, it is time to start collating all of the ideas, all the information, all the answers. We will be putting it all together into reports and blog posts and demos. We will be hosting a showcase event, likely in early 2025, and we'll be bringing those insights to community partners. Community partners will be engaged in the Slack throughout the data kit, but we also want to make sure we have a well put together set of insights that can be easily taken forward. Couple of questions around tools. No preference for tools. DataKind is stack agnostic, so please use the tools that you feel most comfortable with. What we do ask is if you are using a proprietary tool that you provide in a way of accessing that information in a non-proprietary way. So for example, if you're doing a visualization using, say, an ArcGIS or Esri license, that you export that information as, you know, a standard shapefile. If you're using specific layers that you're exporting with, like as a PDF, or you are conveying the information in a way that anyone could access. They don't just need to be logged into a particular license. This is our, I see there's a comment here about DataKind's first project involving information designers and storytellers. I would say yes. This is a real experimentation for DataKind in the 6 weeks here. We're expecting to learn a lot. We'd love you to suggest how you can best engage in any way, but you know, in terms of information design and storytellers, we expect there to be some real user flow questions of how could someone actually get from the raw information to an answer? How might they use a tool that is developed? You'll see as you click into the challenges, we have questions not just from the stakeholder housing actor perspective, so someone like Frank and others who are operating as housing providers in a community. We also have questions from a resident perspective. So for a resident, how could a resident use a data-driven tool to find housing? What are limitations we might have to think of for an individual looking for housing? You know, maybe it needs to work in a mobile first environment because that's the primary tool that someone would be using. Specific data sources as another question. Many data sources are listed in the challenges. We've started with a set of data that's pulled for 2 case study states, Florida and California. We've picked those 2 states because those are the areas that DataKind has done the most housing work so far. So we have pre-pulled data for those 2 states for a number of variables, and you'll see those questions as ones that are called getting started questions in each of the challenges. But we've also provided a list of public data sources that you could take it further with. Those might not be the only data sources that are useful. So as you find more data and more information, we encourage you to share it back to the community so we can add to our repository and add to our wealth of knowledge to learn more. Shayna, I think I've answered a ton of questions here, but I'm looking to you to say, what have I missed? What do we want to make sure folks know about that I didn't share?
I think you got it all, Caitlin. Just a friendly reminder to folks, please join our Slack workspace. We're going to post the recording and the slides there. We have the challenge channels for you all to connect. We also have a help desk. So we're just excited to have you all join us over the next 6 weeks. And if there are any folks that are having trouble with joining Slack, you can send me a quick message. I know someone I'm connecting with already, but we'll be sure to send all of this via Slack, but also email. So if you registered for Eventbrite, we're going to resend all of this information so you don't miss out.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to the next 6 weeks learning together and building solutions that will have a positive social impact. So thank you.